My name is Stephanie Walsh, and I'm 28 years old. Standing outside my childhood home with tomato soup dripping from my burning face, I never imagined this moment would become the turning point of my entire life. Just minutes ago, I had walked into what I thought was a family dinner, only to discover my parents had sold my grandmother's Victorian house without telling me. When I asked why they hadn't mentioned it, my mother Linda grabbed the steaming bowl of soup and hurled it directly at my face, screaming that I had no right to question their decisions. The scalding liquid left red welts across my cheek as my father Richard stood behind her, arms crossed, nodding in approval. That's when I pulled out my phone and called Henderson Law Firm, the same lawyers who had handled Grandmother Rose's estate 5 years ago. Before we dive deeper into this incredible story of family betrayal and ultimate justice, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. Drop your location in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that like button if you're ready for a wild ride. Make sure to subscribe and ring the notification bell because trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next when that phone call reveals secrets that will blow your mind. Mr. Henderson's voice carried a weight I hadn't expected when he answered my call that Tuesday evening. After explaining what had just happened, he asked me to come to his office immediately, saying he had been wondering when someone from the Walsh family would finally contact him. The urgency in his tone sent chills down my spine as I drove through the darkening streets of Portland, my face still stinging from the soup incident. His office building stood empty except for the security guard who let me up to the 15th floor, where Henderson waited with a thick manila folder spread across his mahogany desk. "Stephanie, I've been carrying this burden for 5 years," he began, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. "Your grandmother's original will clearly states that the Victorian house on Elm Street, valued at $850,000, was to be left entirely to you. Not to your parents, not to be divided among siblings, but specifically to you." My hands trembled as he showed me the document bearing Grandmother Rose's distinctive signature, the same looping handwriting I remembered from birthday cards. The will was dated just 6 months before her death, when she had been living independently and managing her own affairs perfectly. Henderson continued explaining that approximately 2 weeks after Rose's funeral, Richard and Linda had appeared at his office with what they claimed was a more recent will, dated during the final month of Rose's life when she had been diagnosed with early-stage Alzheimer's. This newer document left everything to be divided equally among her 3 children, effectively cutting me out completely. "I was suspicious from the beginning," Henderson admitted, "because Rose had been very specific about her intentions regarding you and that house. She visited me 3 times to ensure the language was ironclad." The revelation hit me like a freight train. According to Henderson's records, my parents had sold the house to a developer named Mr. Garrison for $820,000, $30,000 below market value for a quick sale. They had deposited the money into a joint account that I had never known existed. When I called Richard that night to confront him about Henderson's information, his response was swift and vicious. "You ungrateful little witch," he snarled through the phone. "Your grandmother changed her mind about you in those final weeks. She realized you never visited, never called, never cared about anyone but yourself. That house was meant for the family, not for some selfish brat who only showed up when someone died." Linda grabbed the phone from him, her voice shaking with what I now recognize as manufactured emotion. "Rose told us herself that she regretted putting everything in your name. She wanted to make it right before she passed." But Henderson had more devastating news. The original will included a specific clause stating that if anyone attempted to forge or falsify documents related to Rose's estate, they would face both criminal charges and civil penalties. Rose had apparently suspected that someone in the family might try to manipulate her final wishes, especially as her memory began to fade. She had been meticulous about documenting her mental state with her doctor, creating a paper trail that would be nearly impossible to dispute. As I sat in Henderson's office that night, staring at the evidence of my family's betrayal, I realized that the soup incident had been nothing compared to what they had actually stolen from me. This wasn't just about money or property, it was about the complete destruction of everything I thought I knew about the people who raised me. The house had been Rose's way of ensuring I would always have security, a place to call home, a foundation to build my life upon. Instead, my parents had used her declining health as an opportunity to rewrite history itself. My first instinct was to call my older brother Derek, believing he would be as shocked and outraged as I was about our parents' deception. We had always been close growing up, sharing secrets and supporting each other through our parents' various schemes and dramatic episodes. Derek had been my confidant when I struggled through college, my cheerleader when I landed my first marketing job, and my shoulder to cry on during my messy divorce 2 years earlier. Surely he would stand with me against this injustice. Derek agreed to meet me at our usual spot, Rosie's Diner on Fifth Avenue, where we had been sharing late-night conversations since high school. His demeanor seemed off from the moment he slid into the booth across from me, avoiding eye contact and fidgeting with his coffee cup in a way that made my stomach clench with dread. When I laid out everything Henderson had told me, showing him copies of the original will and explaining the timeline of events, Derek's reaction was nothing like what I expected. "Stephanie, you need to let this go," he said quietly, still not meeting my eyes. "Mom and Dad did what they thought was best for the family." The words hung between us like a confession, and suddenly I understood. "You knew," I whispered, feeling the blood drain from my face. "You knew about all of this." Derek's admission came tumbling out in a rush of justifications and excuses that made me physically nauseous. Not only had he known about the forged will, he had actively participated in creating it. I was in serious trouble, Steph. I owed $200,000 to some very dangerous people from my gambling debts. When Grandmother Rose started getting confused, Dad came to me with a solution. We could help the whole family by making sure the inheritance was distributed fairly instead of just going to one person. The betrayal cut deeper than any soup burn ever could. Derek explained how he had researched Rose's handwriting, practiced her signature for weeks, and even stolen samples of her personal stationery from her bedroom during her final hospitalization. He had been the one to forge the new will, using his graphic design skills to make it look authentic. "I convinced them that you didn't really need the house anyway," he continued, his voice growing defensive. "You have a good job, you're young, you can build your own life." But I was going to lose everything, maybe even end up dead. The nightmare deepened when Derek revealed that our younger sister Jessica had also been brought into their conspiracy. Jessica, who had always been the baby of the family, the sweet one who everyone protected and adored, had received $50,000 from the house sale to open her nail salon. She was struggling financially after her divorce, Derek explained. Mom and Dad thought it would help her get back on her feet. Jessica didn't want to take it at first, but they convinced her that you would understand, that family should take care of family. I called Jessica immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed her number. Her voice was thick with tears when she answered, and I could tell she had been expecting this call. "I'm so sorry, Stephanie," she sobbed. "I wanted to tell you, but they said it would tear the family apart. Derek said you had plenty of money and wouldn't even miss it. Mom said Grandmother Rose had changed her mind anyway, so technically we weren't doing anything wrong." Sitting in that diner, listening to my brother rationalize theft and fraud while my sister cried crocodile tears over the phone, I realized that I was completely alone. The 3 people I had trusted most in the world had conspired against me, stolen my inheritance, and lied to my face for 5 years. They had used Rose's deteriorating mental state as cover for their crimes, and they had convinced themselves that their financial problems justified destroying my future security. But Derek wasn't finished delivering devastating news. "Stephanie, you can't fight this. We've had 5 years to cover our tracks, and everyone believes the story we've told. If you try to cause trouble, it's going to get ugly for everyone involved." His tone had shifted from apologetic to threatening, and I saw a side of my brother I had never witnessed before. "Jessica needs her business to succeed, I've got my debts under control now, and Mom and Dad are finally comfortable in their retirement. Don't be selfish enough to destroy all of that over some old house." As I walked out of that diner, I realized that my family hadn't just stolen money from me. They had stolen my identity, my sense of belonging, and my faith in human nature itself. But they had made one crucial mistake. They had underestimated exactly how far I was willing to go to get justice for Rose and for myself. Armed with Henderson's evidence and a burning desire for justice, I decided to file a lawsuit against my entire family for fraud, forgery, and theft. I spent my life savings to retain Blackstone and Associates, one of Portland's most respected litigation firms, and felt confident that truth and justice would prevail. My attorney, Sarah Blackstone, assured me that the case was strong, especially with the original will and Henderson's testimony. We filed the complaint on a Thursday morning, and I actually felt optimistic for the first time in weeks. That optimism was shattered within 48 hours when my family launched their counterattack with a viciousness that left me reeling. They had hired Morrison, Klein and Partners, an expensive firm known for their aggressive tactics and willingness to play dirty. By Monday morning, I was served with papers accusing me of harassment, extortion, and defamation of character. According to their complaint, I was a mentally unstable individual who was attempting to extort money from elderly parents through frivolous litigation and emotional manipulation. The fake evidence they presented was sophisticated and damning. Richard and Linda had created a detailed timeline showing my supposed erratic behavior over the past several months, complete with fabricated text messages where I allegedly threatened to destroy the family if I didn't get what I deserved. They had somehow obtained copies of my credit card statements showing purchases at liquor stores and claimed these proved I had a drinking problem that affected my judgment. Derek had gone even further, creating fake email accounts and social media profiles to manufacture evidence of my supposed mental instability. He had sent threatening messages to himself from these fake accounts, then claimed they came from me. Jessica provided a sworn affidavit stating that I had called her repeatedly while intoxicated and belligerent, demanding money and making incoherent accusations about the family. But their most devastating move was contacting my employer at Pinnacle Creative, where I had worked as a senior marketing coordinator for 3 years. Linda called my supervisor, Mrs. Peterson, claiming to be concerned about Stephanie's mental health and suggesting that I was going through a breakdown that might affect my work performance. She described the soup incident as me violently attacking them during a psychotic episode and expressed fear for their safety. The conversation with Mrs. Peterson was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life. She called me into her office on a Tuesday afternoon, her face grave with concern. "Stephanie, I've received some very troubling information about your personal situation. While I understand that family problems can be difficult, I need to know that our workplace environment remains professional and safe." She explained that the company couldn't afford to have employees whose personal dramas might spill over into the workplace. I was immediately placed on administrative leave pending a psychological evaluation and investigation into my fitness for duty. My access to company systems was revoked, my projects were reassigned, and I was essentially treated like a dangerous criminal who posed a threat to my colleagues. The irony was crushing. I had always been a model employee, never missing deadlines, receiving excellent performance reviews, and maintaining positive relationships with everyone in the office. The financial pressure intensified when I discovered that Richard had somehow convinced my bank to freeze my checking account, claiming that I had been making fraudulent transactions using family members' personal information. Even though this claim was completely false, the bank's fraud protection protocols meant my account would remain frozen pending investigation, potentially for weeks or months. Meanwhile, Jessica played her role perfectly, showing up at my apartment complex to speak with the property manager, Mrs. Chen. She tearfully explained that I was going through a mental health crisis and might become dangerous to myself or others. She suggested that the complex might want to consider whether I was a suitable tenant, especially since I was harassing family members and making threats. As I sat in my empty apartment that night, unemployed, financially frozen, and facing potential eviction, I realized that my family had orchestrated a complete systematic destruction of my life. They weren't just defending themselves against my lawsuit. They were trying to eliminate me entirely, to make me disappear so completely that no one would ever believe my version of events. But even as panic threatened to overwhelm me, a small voice in the back of my mind reminded me that Rose had raised me to be stronger than this. She had survived the Great Depression, raised 3 children as a single mother, and built a successful business from nothing. She wouldn't have wanted me to give up in the face of bullies, even if those bullies shared my DNA. Just when I thought the situation couldn't get worse, Linda called me with a tearful apology that should have immediately raised red flags. Her voice was soft and vulnerable, completely different from the woman who had hurled soup at my face just weeks earlier. "Stephanie, honey, your father and I have been talking, and we realize we've handled this whole situation terribly. We miss you so much, and this family feud is tearing us apart." She explained that they wanted to work things out like adults and invited me to a family dinner at their house that Saturday evening. "We'll have your favorite pot roast, and we can sit down and discuss everything calmly. Maybe we can find a solution that works for everyone." Despite every instinct screaming at me to stay away, I found myself agreeing to the dinner. Part of me desperately wanted to believe that my family could still choose love over greed. Saturday evening arrived with an early autumn chill, and I drove to my childhood home with a mixture of hope and dread. The house looked exactly as it always had, with Linda's prize-winning roses blooming in the front yard and Richard's perfectly maintained lawn stretching toward the street. For a moment, pulling into the driveway, I could almost pretend that none of the horrible events of the past month had happened. Linda greeted me at the door with a warm hug and what seemed like genuine tears in her eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, I've missed you so much. I'm so sorry about everything." The dining room was set with Rose's good china, the same pattern we had used for every special occasion throughout my childhood. The pot roast smelled exactly like I remembered, filling the house with the comforting aromas that had once meant safety and love. Richard was unusually quiet during dinner, letting Linda carry most of the conversation. She talked about mundane things, neighborhood gossip, updates about distant relatives, anything except the legal battle that had consumed our lives. When she poured wine with dinner, I should have been suspicious, but the Pinot Grigio was my favorite vintage, and I assumed it was another peace-offering gesture. "You know, honey," Linda said as I finished my second glass, "maybe we could work out some kind of compromise about Rose's house. You're right that she loved you dearly, and perhaps there's a way to honor that while still being fair to the whole family." My head felt slightly fuzzy, but I attributed it to the emotional stress and the wine. I found myself agreeing that compromise might be possible, that maybe we could find a solution without destroying the family. That's when everything went black. I woke up in a holding cell at the Portland Police Department with no memory of how I had gotten there. My head pounded, my mouth felt like cotton, and I was wearing the same clothes from dinner but they were torn and disheveled. The desk sergeant, a kind-faced woman named Officer Martinez, explained that I had been arrested for domestic assault and disturbing the peace. According to the police report, neighbors had called 911 after hearing screaming and crashing sounds from my parents' house around 10:30 p.m. When officers arrived, they found Linda with a bloody nose and scratches on her arms, claiming that I had gone crazy during dinner and attacked her. Richard corroborated the story, showing officers broken dishes and overturned furniture as evidence of my supposed rampage. The most damning evidence was a cell phone video that Derek had apparently recorded, showing me appearing to stumble around the living room while slurring threats at Linda. In the video, I looked exactly like someone having a drug or alcohol-fueled breakdown, completely out of control and dangerous. I had no memory of any of these events, but the evidence against me seemed overwhelming. What I discovered later, through my attorney's investigation, was that Linda had drugged my wine with a combination of sleeping medication and alcohol that would cause disorientation and memory loss. While I was unconscious, they had created the entire scene, staging the broken furniture, giving Linda superficial injuries that looked worse than they were, and recording the fake video using careful camera angles and editing. But the setup went even deeper than I initially realized. While I was passed out, Derek had used my phone to post several rambling, incoherent messages on my Facebook account. These posts talked about making the family pay and showing them what real pain feels like. He had also sent text messages from my phone to various family friends and distant relatives, messages that made me sound paranoid, threatening, and completely unhinged. By Sunday morning, everyone in our extended social circle had seen these posts and messages. My reputation was destroyed not just professionally, but personally as well. Friends stopped returning my calls, former colleagues unfriended me on social media, and even my neighbors began looking at me with suspicion and fear. The criminal charges meant I now faced the possibility of jail time in addition to all my other problems. My attorney explained that domestic assault charges in Oregon carry serious penalties, especially with my family's fabricated evidence of premeditation and escalating behavior. Even if I could eventually prove my innocence, the legal fees and time involved would bankrupt me completely. Sitting in that jail cell, I realized that my family hadn't just stolen my inheritance, they had stolen my identity, my reputation, and potentially my freedom. They had turned me into exactly the kind of person Rose would have been ashamed to call her granddaughter. But they had also made a crucial mistake. They had underestimated my capacity for survival, and they had forgotten that Rose had taught me never to surrender in the face of injustice, no matter how powerful the enemy appeared to be. The assault charges resulted in my immediate termination from Pinnacle Creative, eliminating any hope of returning to my career there. My apartment complex, citing the criminal charges and the disturbance Jessica had reported, gave me 30 days' notice to vacate the premises. With my bank account still frozen and legal fees mounting, I was forced to move into a grim studio apartment in a rundown section of Portland where the walls were paper thin and the heating barely worked. My life had been reduced to its most basic elements. A mattress on the floor, a few changes of clothes, and the growing stack of legal documents that represented my desperate fight for justice. I survived on ramen noodles and generic bread, watching my savings disappear while my family continued their systematic destruction of my credibility. Every morning, I woke up wondering if fighting back was worth the complete annihilation of my life. The isolation was perhaps the worst part. Friends who had known me for years began treating me like a stranger, clearly uncomfortable with the criminal charges and the stories my family had spread about my supposed mental breakdown. My college roommate, Maria, was one of the few people brave enough to have an honest conversation with me, but even she seemed nervous and kept the meeting brief. "Look, Stephanie, I don't know what to believe anymore," Maria admitted over coffee at a downtown cafe. "The person you're describing isn't the family I remember from college, but the evidence everyone's talking about is pretty convincing. Maybe you should consider getting some help, taking a break from all this legal stuff, and focusing on your mental health." Even my closest friends had been poisoned against me. Jessica's betrayal became even more painful when she appeared at my studio apartment on a rainy Tuesday evening, tears streaming down her face and carrying a box of tissues. "Stephanie, I'm so worried about you," she sobbed, embracing me with what felt like genuine sisterly affection. "This whole situation has gotten so out of hand. Maybe we can convince Mom and Dad to drop the charges if you agree to get some counseling and stop the lawsuit." For nearly an hour, Jessica played the part of the concerned younger sister perfectly. She listened sympathetically as I explained my side of the story, nodded understandingly when I described the drugged wine and the fabricated evidence, and even agreed that some of the family's tactics seemed a bit extreme. I found myself opening up to her, sharing my fears about the future and my desperate loneliness. What I didn't realize was that Jessica was recording our entire conversation on her phone, hidden in her purse. She was gathering evidence to use against me, documenting anything I said that could be twisted to support their narrative of my mental instability. When I discovered this betrayal weeks later through my attorney's investigation, it felt like losing Jessica all over again, but this time with the added sting of knowing she had looked me in the eye while planning my destruction. The lowest point came on a Thursday morning when I found myself standing on the Burnside Bridge, looking down at the dark waters of the Willamette River and seriously considering whether life was worth continuing. The combination of financial ruin, legal troubles, family betrayal, and complete social isolation had brought me to a place I never thought I would reach. For the first time in my life, I understood why people give up entirely. But as I stood there in the cold morning air, I heard Rose's voice in my memory, not the confused woman from her final months, but the strong, determined grandmother who had raised me with stories of perseverance and courage. "Stephanie Marie," she used to say, "difficult roads often lead to beautiful destinations, but only for those brave enough to keep walking." That afternoon, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was elderly but strong, with the careful pronunciation of someone from Rose's generation. "Is this Stephanie Walsh?" "My dear, this is Dorothy Matthews. I was your grandmother's next-door neighbor for 37 years, and I believe it's time we had a conversation about what really happened the night before Rose died." Mrs. Matthews' call came at exactly the moment when I had lost all hope, and her words offered the first real glimmer of light I had seen in months. She explained that she had been following the news about my legal troubles through mutual friends, and she could no longer remain silent about what she had witnessed the night before Rose's death. "I saw your father and your brother Derek at Rose's house very late that evening," she continued. "There was shouting, which was unusual because Rose had been so weak and quiet in those final days. I looked out my bedroom window and saw them in her backyard around midnight, burning papers in that old metal trash barrel she used for autumn leaves. They stayed for nearly 2 hours, and when they left, Derek was carrying a small suitcase that I had never seen before." Mrs. Matthews had kept this information to herself for 5 years, assuming it was private family business and not wanting to interfere during a time of grief. But watching my character assassination in the local news had convinced her that Rose would want the truth to come out, no matter how painful it might be for the family. "Your grandmother spoke about you constantly in those final months," Mrs. Matthews revealed. "She was so proud of your marketing career, so excited about the plans she had made to leave you her house. She never mentioned changing her mind, never expressed any disappointment in you. If anything, she seemed more determined than ever to make sure you were taken care of after she was gone. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like someone else knew the truth about what had happened." Mrs. Matthews agreed to meet with me the following day, and she promised to share everything she remembered about Rose's final weeks. As I hung up the phone, I realized that my family's biggest mistake had been assuming that their crimes had no witnesses. Rose had always told me that truth has a way of surfacing, no matter how deeply people try to bury it. Standing in my dismal studio apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of my life, I finally understood what she meant. The fight was far from over, but for the first time in months, I had reason to believe I might actually win. Mrs. Dorothy Matthews lived in the same modest ranch house next to Rose's former property, where she had been watching neighborhood life unfold for nearly 4 decades. When I knocked on her door that crisp October morning, she welcomed me with the kind of warm smile that reminded me immediately of my grandmother. Her living room was filled with photographs spanning decades, including several pictures of Rose from community events and holiday gatherings. "Your grandmother was like a sister to me," Mrs. Matthews began, settling into her favorite armchair with a cup of tea. "We shared everything, from garden tips to family worries." In those final months, when her memory started fading, she became almost obsessive about making sure her affairs were in order. She visited her lawyer multiple times and kept talking about how important it was that you inherit her house. Mrs. Matthews pulled out a small notebook where she had been recording neighborhood activities for years, a habit she had developed after a string of break-ins several years earlier. Her entries from Rose's final weeks painted a picture of increasing family tension that no one else had documented. October 15th, Richard and Linda arrived at Rose's house around 9 p.m., voices raised in the backyard. October 22nd, Derek's truck parked outside for 3 hours while Rose was supposed to be sleeping. October 29th, the night before Rose died, all 3 of them at the house until after midnight, burning papers and removing boxes. But Mrs. Matthews had an even more valuable connection than I had hoped. Her grandson, Marcus Thompson, worked as a detective with the Portland Police Department, specializing in fraud investigations. "Marcus has always been interested in justice," she explained with obvious pride. When I told him about what I witnessed that night, he agreed to look into the situation unofficially. Detective Thompson was a tall, serious man in his 30s with the kind of steady presence that inspired immediate trust. When we met at a downtown coffee shop the following evening, he explained that while he couldn't officially investigate my family due to the ongoing civil lawsuit, he could examine public records and follow up on leads as a concerned citizen. "I've seen cases like this before," he said, reviewing the timeline Mrs. Matthews had provided. "Elder abuse often involves family members who manipulate legal documents during periods of cognitive decline. The pattern of behavior your grandmother's neighbors witnessed fits the profile perfectly. Marcus had already begun his unofficial investigation and discovered several crucial pieces of evidence that my family hadn't been able to hide. The most significant was a backup copy of Rose's original will, filed with the county clerk's office as part of standard probate procedure. This copy clearly showed the date and time stamps that proved it had been filed months before the fake will my family had presented. Even more damning, Marcus found records showing that Richard had visited 3 different notary publics in the weeks following Rose's death, apparently searching for someone who would be willing to backdate documents without asking too many questions. The third notary, Ms. Patricia Williams, had kept detailed records because Richard's requests had made her uncomfortable. Mr. Walsh asked me to notarize a document that he claimed had been signed weeks earlier by his deceased mother, Ms. Williams told Marcus during their conversation. When I explained that I couldn't backdate notarizations, he became agitated and left quickly. I made notes about the interaction because it seemed suspicious. But our most powerful ally emerged from an unexpected source. Patricia Chen, a registered nurse who had worked at Rose's assisted living facility during her final month, contacted me through the facility's administration after hearing about the legal proceedings. She had information that could potentially destroy my family's entire fabricated timeline. I was working the night shift during your grandmother's final weeks, Nurse Chen explained during our meeting at a quiet restaurant near the medical center. She was still quite lucid most of the time, especially in the evenings. I distinctly remember her talking about her will and how important it was that her granddaughter inherit the family house. More importantly, Nurse Chen had overheard a conversation between Richard and Linda on the night before Rose's death. They thought she was sleeping, but she was just resting with her eyes closed. They were discussing how to handle the will situation and whether anyone would question changes made during her illness. Your mother specifically said something about how the lawyer wouldn't be suspicious if they presented new documents right after the funeral. Nurse Chen had made detailed notes in Rose's medical file about her cognitive state during those final weeks, notes that directly contradicted my family's claims about her mental incapacity. Your grandmother was concerned about her memory problems, but she was still capable of making important decisions. She certainly understood the significance of her will and expressed consistent wishes about her property. The evidence was building into a compelling case, but Marcus warned me that my family wouldn't give up without a fight. They've invested too much in this lie to back down easily. When cornered, people like this often become desperate and dangerous. His warning proved prophetic when Derek appeared at Mrs. Matthews' house the following week while she was gardening in her front yard. According to her account, he approached her with false friendliness before his tone turned threatening. Mrs. Matthews, I hope you understand that family business should stay within the family, Derek had said, standing uncomfortably close to her while she knelt beside her rose bushes. It would be terrible if something happened to you because you got involved in things that don't concern you. This neighborhood used to be so safe, but you never know when accidents might happen to elderly people living alone. Mrs. Matthews, despite being in her 70s, showed the same courage that had made her Rose's closest friend. She looked Derek directly in the eye and replied, "Young man, I've lived through the Great Depression, World War II, and 40 years of marriage to a police officer. If you think you can intimidate me, you've picked the wrong old lady." But Derek's threat had served its purpose by revealing how desperate my family had become. They knew that witnesses were emerging, evidence was mounting, and their carefully constructed lies were beginning to crumble. Marcus advised all of us to be extremely careful, warning that cornered criminals often resort to increasingly dangerous tactics. As I left Marcus's office that evening, I realized that Rose's spirit was still protecting me, sending allies and evidence exactly when I needed them most. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had an army fighting alongside me instead of facing the enemy alone. The truth was finally beginning to emerge from the shadows where my family had tried to bury it, and I could almost hear Rose whispering her encouragement across the years, "Keep fighting, sweetheart. Justice is coming." Armed with Mrs. Matthews' witness testimony, Detective Thompson's evidence, and Nurse Chen's medical records, my attorney Sarah Blackstone filed an amended complaint that painted a devastating picture of my family's criminal conspiracy. The new filing included charges of elder abuse, document forgery, perjury, fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like we were moving from defense to offense. The response from my family's legal team was swift and vicious. Within 72 hours, they had filed a motion claiming that Mrs. Matthews was suffering from dementia and couldn't be considered a reliable witness. They produced a fake medical report suggesting that her testimony was the result of age-related cognitive impairment and confusion about dates and events. But their most devastating counterattack came through Derek's criminal connections from his gambling days. 2 weeks after we filed our amended complaint, I was pulled over by police during my morning drive to Sarah's office. The officer, claiming to be conducting a routine traffic stop, asked to search my vehicle. Hidden under my spare tire, they found a small bag of heroin that I had never seen before. The arrest made local news headlines: woman suing family found with drugs during traffic stop. The timing was too convenient to be coincidental, and Marcus immediately suspected that Derek had used his gambling contacts to plant the drugs and tip off police about my location. But proving this theory would be nearly impossible, and the damage to my credibility was immediate and severe. Linda played her most manipulative card by staging what appeared to be a stroke, collapsing during a family gathering while surrounded by witnesses who could testify to her devastating health impact from my vicious lawsuit. She was hospitalized for 3 days, during which time the media painted me as the heartless daughter who was literally killing her mother through legal harassment. The supposed stroke allowed Linda to appear in court looking frail and vulnerable, supported by a walker and speaking in a weak voice about how my false accusations had destroyed her health and torn the family apart. Her performance was Academy Award worthy, complete with trembling hands and carefully timed emotional breakdowns. Derek escalated his intimidation campaign by targeting Detective Thompson's career, filing a formal complaint with Internal Affairs claiming that Marcus was conducting an unauthorized investigation and using police resources for personal gain. The complaint alleged that Marcus was romantically involved with me and was abusing his position to help fabricate evidence against my family. While these allegations were eventually dismissed, the investigation required Marcus to step back from helping with my case, temporarily removing one of my most valuable allies. Derek's tactics were sophisticated and well-coordinated, suggesting he had learned more than just gambling strategies during his involvement with criminal organizations. The legal proceedings dragged on for 8 months, during which time both sides engaged in increasingly desperate tactics. My family hired private investigators to follow me, hoping to document behavior they could use to support their mental instability narrative. They photographed me buying wine at grocery stores, claiming it proved I had a drinking problem. They documented my visits to a counselor's office, suggesting I was receiving psychiatric treatment for dangerous delusions. Jessica's role in the conspiracy became more apparent when she accidentally sent me a text message that was intended for Derek. "Mom's stroke performance was perfect today." Judge totally believed it. "How long do we keep this up?" When I confronted her about the message, she claimed her phone had been hacked and the text was fake, but the damage was done. I finally had proof that Linda's medical emergency was completely fabricated. The breakthrough came when Nurse Chen produced a recording she had made on her personal phone during one of her shifts at Rose's facility. Hospital policy prohibited recording, but Chen had been so disturbed by what she overheard that night that she violated protocol to document it. The recording captured Linda and Richard's conversation about manipulating Rose's will, including specific details about their plan to present forged documents after the funeral. "The old bat won't last much longer," Richard's voice was clearly audible on the recording. "Once she's gone, we present the new will and split everything 3 ways. Stephanie won't be able to prove anything, especially if we move fast." Linda's response was equally damning: "Rose always liked Stephanie too much anyway. It's not fair that one grandchild gets everything while our other children get nothing." My family's legal team fought desperately to exclude the recording, claiming it was obtained illegally and violated patient privacy rights. But Sarah Blackstone argued successfully that the recording documented ongoing criminal activity and was therefore admissible under whistleblower protection statutes. The final blow came when Marcus's investigation uncovered financial records showing exactly how my family had spent the stolen inheritance money. Richard and Linda had purchased a luxury RV for $60,000, taken a European cruise costing $15,000, and invested heavily in Derek's new consulting business that existed only on paper. Jessica had used her share not just for the nail salon, but also for a new BMW and a down payment on a condominium. But they had made one crucial mistake in their spending spree. Derek had used some of the inheritance money to pay off his gambling debts to a loan shark named Vincent Carlucci, creating a paper trail that connected the stolen funds directly to illegal activities. This discovery allowed prosecutors to file criminal charges against Derek for money laundering in addition to the civil fraud case. As the evidence mounted and their lies began unraveling, my family's unity started cracking under pressure. Jessica, facing potential criminal charges as an accessory to fraud, hired her own attorney and began cooperating with prosecutors in exchange for immunity. Her testimony provided the final pieces needed to prove the conspiracy's timeline and scope. The courtroom drama reached its peak when Richard, under aggressive cross-examination, finally lost control and revealed his true nature. "That house should have been split among all the children," he shouted at Sarah Blackstone. "Rose was a selfish old woman who played favorites her whole life. We did what was fair, what was right for the whole family." His outburst was exactly the confession we had been waiting for. As I sat in that courtroom, watching my family's carefully constructed lies collapse under the weight of evidence and testimony, I realized that Rose had been right about truth eventually surfacing. But I also understood that victory in court would be only the beginning of rebuilding my life from the ashes of their betrayal. The judge's ruling came on a gray Tuesday morning in March, nearly 18 months after that fateful soup incident that had started this entire nightmare. Judge Patricia Morrison, a stern woman known for her intolerance of fraud and family manipulation, delivered her decision with the kind of precision that left no room for appeal or misinterpretation. This court finds that the defendants engaged in a systematic and premeditated campaign of elder abuse, document forgery, perjury, and theft, Judge Morrison announced, her voice carrying the full weight of legal authority. The evidence clearly demonstrates that the will presented by Richard Walsh, Linda Walsh, and Derek Walsh was a fraudulent document created with the specific intent to deprive the rightful heir of her lawful inheritance. The court ordered my family to return the full $820,000 from the house sale, plus compound interest calculated from the date of sale, bringing the total to $935,000. Additionally, they were required to pay punitive damages of $500,000 for their fraudulent actions and another $200,000 to cover my legal fees. But the most satisfying part of the ruling addressed the systematic character assassination they had orchestrated against me. Judge Morrison specifically noted that the defendants' attempts to discredit the plaintiff through fabricated evidence, false criminal allegations, and coordinated defamation represents some of the most egregious misconduct this court has ever witnessed in a family dispute. Derek's sentencing was particularly harsh because of his role as the mastermind behind the forgery and his subsequent attempts to intimidate witnesses. He received 2 years in state prison for fraud, an additional year for attempted witness tampering, and was ordered to pay restitution covering my lost wages and damaged credit rating. Watching him being led away in handcuffs felt like a scene from a movie rather than real life. Richard and Linda, despite their ages, were sentenced to 18 months of supervised probation, 500 hours of community service, and a permanent restraining order preventing them from contacting me or any of the witnesses who had testified on my behalf. Linda's fake stroke performance was specifically mentioned in the ruling as evidence of their willingness to manipulate even the court system itself. The criminal case also revealed the extent of their financial deception. In addition to stealing my inheritance, they had been systematically draining Rose's accounts during her final months, transferring money into their own names while she was too confused to understand what was happening. The total theft exceeded $1.2 million when all their various schemes were uncovered. But perhaps the most unexpected victory came from an investigation into the house sale itself. Detective Thompson, working with the district attorney's office, discovered that Mr. Garrison, the developer who had purchased Rose's house, had known he was dealing with a questionable title. The below-market purchase price and rushed closing had raised red flags that Garrison chose to ignore in hopes of getting a valuable property cheaply. This discovery allowed me to file a separate lawsuit against Garrison for knowingly purchasing stolen property. His insurance company, rather than face a prolonged legal battle, agreed to settle for $180,000, the difference between what my family had accepted and the house's true market value. Combined with the court judgment, I had not only recovered my inheritance but gained additional compensation for the pain and suffering they had caused. My professional life also experienced a remarkable resurrection. Pinnacle Creative, faced with evidence of how they had been manipulated by my family's lies, offered me not only reinstatement but a promotion to marketing director with a formal apology and a settlement for wrongful termination. The $300,000 settlement check felt like vindication for every sleepless night I had spent wondering if I would ever work again. The apartment complex where I had been threatened with eviction sent a written apology and offered me a lease on one of their premium units at a significantly reduced rate. My credit rating, which had been destroyed by my family's false accusations and fraudulent activities, was completely restored with the help of legal documentation proving the charges against me had been fabricated. Jessica's cooperation with prosecutors had earned her immunity from criminal charges, but she still faced the civil judgment for her share of the stolen inheritance. When she came to me, tears streaming down her face and begging for forgiveness, I was surprised by my own emotional response. Unlike Richard, Linda, and Derek, Jessica seemed genuinely remorseful about her role in the conspiracy. "I know I don't deserve it, but I'm hoping we can rebuild our relationship someday," she said during our painful conversation at a neutral coffee shop. I was weak and scared, and I let them convince me that what we were doing wasn't really that wrong. "I know now that there's no excuse for what I did to you." While I wasn't ready to trust Jessica completely, I agreed to consider reconciliation over time if she proved her commitment to honesty and making amends. She had voluntarily entered therapy to address her willingness to participate in family manipulation, and she was working 2 jobs to pay back her share of the stolen money ahead of the court-ordered schedule. Detective Marcus Thompson had become much more than just an ally in my fight for justice. Our shared experience of uncovering the truth had developed into genuine friendship and eventually romance. He proposed to me 6 months after the final court judgment, presenting the ring at the same downtown coffee shop where we had first discussed the evidence against my family. Mrs. Dorothy Matthews had become like a surrogate grandmother, filling some of the emotional void left by Rose's death and my family's betrayal. She attended every court hearing, celebrated every victory, and provided the kind of unwavering support that reminded me that chosen family can be stronger than blood relations. The house that had started this entire battle was eventually sold by Mr. Garrison's company, and I used a portion of my settlement money to purchase a beautiful Victorian home just 3 blocks from where Rose had lived. It felt like coming full circle, creating a new beginning in a place that honored her memory while allowing me to build my own future. Standing in the garden of my new home, planting roses in honor of my grandmother's memory, I realized that the soup incident had been a blessing in disguise. Without that moment of shocking clarity, I might never have discovered the extent of my family's betrayal, and Rose's true wishes might have remained buried forever. 2 years have passed since Judge Morrison delivered her final ruling, and as I sit in the sunroom of my Victorian home, surrounded by Rose's antique furniture and family photographs, I can honestly say that I've found peace in ways I never expected. The house isn't just a place to live, it's become a sanctuary where I've created something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal. The front room now serves as my office for Walsh Family Justice Advocacy, a non-profit organization I founded to help other families navigate elder abuse and inheritance fraud. Every week, I receive calls from people whose stories echo my own, adult children discovering that parents or siblings have manipulated elderly relatives, forged documents, or stolen inheritances through emotional manipulation and legal deception. What started as my personal nightmare has become my mission to prevent others from experiencing the same devastating betrayal. Marcus and I married last spring in a small ceremony in Mrs. Matthews' backyard, surrounded by the friends who had supported us through the darkest period of our lives. She walked me down the aisle, her arm steady and strong, representing all the family bonds that choose love over greed. Our honeymoon was spent in Ireland, visiting the villages where Rose's grandparents had lived before immigrating to America, connecting with roots that felt more genuine than the family that had raised me. Jessica has slowly earned back a place in my life through consistent actions rather than empty promises. She completed her therapy program, paid back every penny of her portion of the stolen inheritance ahead of schedule, and volunteers regularly at Walsh Family Justice Advocacy. Our relationship will never be what it was before, but we've built something new based on honesty and mutual respect rather than blind trust. She serves as a powerful reminder that people can change when they truly want to make amends. Richard and Linda's lives took very different paths after their convictions. Richard, unable to accept responsibility for his actions, spent his probation period bitter and angry, telling anyone who would listen that he was the victim of an ungrateful daughter's vindictive lawsuit. He and Linda divorced 6 months after the trial, their marriage another casualty of the greed that had driven them to destroy their family. Linda, on the other hand, seemed genuinely broken by the realization of what she had done, and spent her community service hours working with elderly patients at a nursing home, perhaps seeking some form of redemption. Derek completed his prison sentence and attempted to contact me several times seeking forgiveness and reconciliation. Each letter was filled with explanations, justifications, and requests for understanding that showed he still didn't truly comprehend the magnitude of his betrayal. Unlike Jessica, Derek's apologies felt calculated rather than genuine, focused more on relieving his own guilt than acknowledging the harm he had caused. I've chosen not to respond to his outreach, recognizing that some relationships cannot and should not be repaired. The most profound healing has come through my work with other families facing similar crises. Last month, I helped a woman whose brother had forged their father's will to steal the family farm. 3 weeks ago, I testified as an expert witness in a case where adult children had emotionally manipulated their mother with dementia into changing her estate plan. Each victory feels like honoring Rose's memory while preventing other families from experiencing the devastation mine inflicted. Mrs. Matthews, now 82, remains one of my closest friends and advisors. She spends every Sunday afternoon at our house, sharing stories about Rose's younger days and helping tend the memorial garden I've created in her memory. Her courage in speaking truth to power, despite Derek's attempts at intimidation, serves as a daily reminder that ordinary people can choose extraordinary bravery when justice demands it. The financial recovery exceeded even my wildest hopes. Between the court judgment, settlement with Mr. Garrison, wrongful termination compensation, and my nonprofit's growing success, I'm more financially secure than I ever imagined possible. But the real wealth lies in understanding the difference between family that shares DNA and family that shares values, between people who love you and people who simply want to use you. Marcus and I are expecting our first child this fall, a daughter we plan to name Rose Dorothy Thompson, honoring both the grandmother who protected me from beyond the grave and the neighbor who risked her own safety to ensure truth prevailed. This baby will grow up knowing that love isn't determined by blood relations, that justice sometimes requires great sacrifice, and that standing up for what's right is always worth the cost. The legal profession has also gained from our experience. The case has been studied in law schools as an example of sophisticated family fraud, and the evidence-gathering techniques Marcus developed have been adopted by police departments across the country. Sarah Blackstone has become a nationally recognized expert in elder abuse litigation, using our victory to help other attorneys recognize the warning signs of inheritance manipulation. Sometimes people ask if I regret fighting back so hard, if the pain and struggle were worth the ultimate victory. The answer is always immediate and certain: every sleepless night, every dollar spent on legal fees, every moment of doubt and despair was worthwhile because the alternative was allowing Rose's memory to be dishonored and her wishes to be ignored by people who confused family obligation with personal entitlement. The house still holds Rose's presence in ways that bring me daily comfort. Her favorite rocking chair sits by the window where she used to watch the neighborhood children play. Her recipes fill my kitchen with the same aromas that comforted me throughout childhood. Her books line the shelves where I now write reports about family justice and elder protection. She would be proud to know that her final gift to me became the foundation for helping others find their own path to justice. As I watch the sun set over the garden where Rose once taught me that beautiful things require patience, persistence, and proper care, I understand that my story isn't really about money or houses or legal victories. It's about the choice between becoming bitter or becoming better, between allowing betrayal to define you or using it to discover strength you never knew you possessed. The soup that burned my face that terrible evening marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, the moment when I stopped being someone who accepted injustice and became someone who fights for what's right. Sometimes the most painful experiences in life are actually gifts in disguise, forcing us to discover who we really are when everything we thought we knew disappears. If you've experienced family betrayal or witnessed elder abuse, please know that you're not alone and you're not powerless. Justice may require patience, evidence, and tremendous courage, but it's always possible for those willing to fight for it. Have you or someone you know faced similar family manipulation or inheritance fraud? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below, and please don't forget to like this video if it resonated with your own experiences. Subscribe to hear more stories about overcoming family betrayal and finding justice against all odds, and share this video with anyone who might need to know that standing up for what's right is always worth the struggle. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that every ending can become a new beginning if you have the courage to keep fighting for truth.